Let me ask you something. What if everything XRP holders have been waiting for, the legal clarity, the institutional adoption, the global recognition, what if all of that was about to collide in a single 24-hour window? Because right now, the data, the timing, and the on-chain signals are pointing to something that even the most skeptical analysts in this space are having a hard time ignoring. Stay with me, because what I'm about to break down changes everything. Hey everyone, Justin Wu here. If you're new to the channel, welcome. This is where we cut through the noise, skip the hype, and talk about what's actually happening in crypto and finance with honesty, clarity, and respect for your intelligence. If you've been here for a while, you already know. When I bring something to this channel, it's because the research backs it up. Today is no different. Before we go any further, I need to be completely transparent with you, because that's what this channel is built on. Nothing in this video is financial advice. I am not a licensed financial advisor, and nothing I say here should be taken as a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any asset. Crypto markets are highly volatile, unpredictable, and carry significant risk. You could lose money. Always do your own research, consult with a qualified financial professional before making any investment decisions, and never invest more than you are prepared to lose. This video is strictly for educational and informational purposes only. With that said, let's get into it. To understand why the next 24 hours matter so much for XRP, you have to understand where we've been. Because this story didn't start yesterday, and it didn't start last month. This has been years in the making, years of court battles, regulatory uncertainty, community frustration, and institutional hesitation. For a long time, XRP sat in this uncomfortable gray zone where the technology was undeniably powerful, the network was undeniably fast and efficient, but the legal cloud hanging over it kept major players on the sidelines. Banks were watching, institutions were watching, regulators were watching, and XRP holders were waiting. That waiting, for a lot of people, became exhausting. Some left, some sold, some lost faith in the project entirely. But the ones who stayed, the ones who kept doing the research, kept watching the fundamentals, kept tracking the real-world use cases, they held on because they understood something that the broader market was slow to recognize. XRP was never just a speculative asset. It was always a technology play, a cross-border payment solution designed for the speed and efficiency demands of global finance. And the moment the regulatory picture cleared, even partially, the dynamics of this asset were always going to shift dramatically. And that shift, that moment, feels closer right now than it ever has before. Here's what's driving the conversation today. When you look at the convergence of signals happening simultaneously, the regulatory environment, the institutional positioning, the on-chain data, the macro context, you start to see a picture that's harder and harder to dismiss. Let me walk you through each piece, because it's the combination of all of them together that gives this moment its weight. First, let's talk about the regulatory landscape, because this is the foundation everything else is built on. The legal battle between Ripple and the SEC has been one of the most closely watched cases in the entire history of cryptocurrency, and the reason it matters so much, not just for XRP but for the entire industry, is because its outcome effectively determines how digital assets are classified and regulated in the United States. The partial ruling that acknowledged XRP as not being a security in programmatic sales was a seismic moment. It was the first time a court had pushed back meaningfully against the SEC's broad application of securities law to crypto assets. And while the case has had its twists and turns since then, the overall trajectory has been moving toward resolution. The current regulatory environment in the United States, with a more crypto-friendly posture emerging from Washington, is creating conditions where that resolution feels not just possible, but imminent. When you have regulatory clarity, institutions move. And institutions moving into XRP at scale would be a fundamentally different event than retail speculation driving price action. We're talking about banks, payment processors, asset managers, and sovereign financial institutions that have been sitting on the sidelines precisely because of the legal ambiguity. The moment that ambiguity evaporates, the calculus changes entirely. The second piece of this puzzle is the institutional side, and this is where things get genuinely fascinating. Over the last several months, we've seen a quiet but unmistakable shift in how traditional financial institutions are talking about and positioning around XRP. The conversations happening at the highest levels of global finance are no longer about whether digital assets belong in the system. They're about which ones and how. And XRP's value proposition for cross-border settlements keeps coming up in those conversations because the problem it solves is real, it's enormous, and it's not going away. The global correspondent banking system is slow, expensive, and opaque. Trillions of dollars move across borders every single day through a network of intermediary banks that adds friction, cost, and delay to every transaction. Ripple's technology, and specifically the use of XRP as a bridge currency, offers a solution to that problem that is faster, cheaper, and more transparent than anything the legacy system provides. That's not a marketing claim. That's a technical reality that financial institutions have been quietly testing and piloting for years. The question was never whether the technology worked. The question was always whether the regulatory environment would allow them to use it at scale. And that question is getting closer to being answered definitively. Now let's talk about the on-chain data, because this is where the signals get really specific. When you look at XRP's on-chain metrics over the last several weeks, wallet activity, transaction volumes, large holder movements, exchange inflows and outflows, you start to see patterns that historically have preceded significant price events. Large wallets that have been dormant for extended periods are showing activity. Exchange outflows are increasing, which typically signals that holders are moving assets off exchanges into private storage, a behavior associated with accumulation and long-term holding rather than preparation to sell. Transaction volumes on the XRP ledger itself are elevated, suggesting real utility demand rather than just speculative trading pressure. None of these signals in isolation would be enough to draw strong conclusions, but when you see all of them moving in the same direction at the same time against a backdrop of improving regulatory conditions and growing institutional interest, the pattern becomes much more compelling. Analysts who track these metrics professionally, people who do this for a living, not just social media commentators, are flagging this confluence of signals as unusual. Not unprecedented, but unusual enough to warrant serious attention. The macro context matters here too, and I don't think it gets enough credit in these conversations. We are living through a period of extraordinary monetary and geopolitical transition. The dominance of the US dollar in global trade is being questioned in ways it hasn't been in decades. Central banks around the world are exploring digital currencies. Cross-border payment systems are being redesigned from the ground up. The infrastructure of global finance is actively being rebuilt, and the assets and technologies that position themselves correctly within that rebuilding stand to benefit enormously. XRP was designed for exactly this moment, not for a future hypothetical version of global finance, for the present, messy, transitional reality of it. The ability to move value across borders in seconds at minimal cost with finality and transparency is not a feature that will matter someday. It's a feature that matters right now, today, in the actual world we're living in, and as the institutions and regulators who control the flow of global capital start to recognize that, the position of XRP within the broader financial ecosystem shifts accordingly. Now, I want to address the 85% figure directly because intellectual honesty demands it. When analysts and market observers talk about probability estimates in crypto, they're not working from a controlled scientific experiment, they're aggregating signals, on-chain data, regulatory momentum, institutional behavior, historical pattern recognition, macro context, and expressing a level of confidence based on the weight of that evidence. 85% does not mean certainty. It means that based on the available evidence, the conditions are more likely than not to produce a meaningful outcome within the specified timeframe. The 15% exists because markets are unpredictable, because external events can shift conditions rapidly, and because no analytical framework in crypto, or in any financial market, is infallible. What the 85% figure actually communicates is this. The confluence of signals we are seeing right now is strong enough and aligned enough that dismissing it without serious examination would be intellectually irresponsible. That's not hype. That's a calibrated assessment of available evidence by people who have been tracking this market professionally for years. You should weigh it accordingly, seriously, but not as gospel. Let me also speak to the people watching this who have been holding XRP through the difficult periods, because I know some of you have been in this for a long time and the journey has not been easy. The years of waiting, the price volatility, the legal uncertainty, the moments where it felt like the entire project might be buried under regulatory pressure. That experience is real and it deserves acknowledgement. The holders who stayed through all of that did so because they believed in something that the short-term price action didn't always reflect. They believed in the technology, the use case, the long-term vision of what XRP could mean for global finance. And right now, for the first time in a long time, the external environment is starting to align with that vision in a way that feels genuine rather than speculative. That doesn't mean the journey is over. It doesn't mean there won't be more volatility, more uncertainty, more frustrating periods ahead. Crypto doesn't work that way, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But it does mean that the foundation under XRP right now, regulatory, institutional, technological, and macroeconomic, is stronger than it has ever been. And that matters. For the people watching who are newer to this space and are trying to figure out how to think about XRP and this moment, here's the framework I'd encourage you to use. Start with the technology. Understand what XRP actually does, what problem it solves, and how it compares to alternatives. Not from a YouTube video. From the actual documentation, from independent technical analyses, from people who have stress-tested the claims and come back with honest assessments. Then look at the regulatory picture not through the lens of optimism or pessimism, but through the lens of what is actually happening in courts and legislative chambers and regulatory agencies. Then look at the institutional adoption curve. Who is using this technology? Who is testing it? Who has publicly committed to integrating it into their systems? And finally, look at the macro environment, where global finance is heading, what problems need to be solved, and whether XRP's value proposition addresses those problems in a way that has staying power. If you do all of that honestly, you will arrive at your own informed conclusion. And that informed conclusion, whatever it is, will be worth far more than anything I or anyone else on YouTube tells you to think. Before I close, I want to say something about this community because I think it deserves to be said. The XRP community has been through a lot. It has been mocked, dismissed, attacked, and written off more times than I can count. And through all of it, the core of this community kept doing the work, kept researching, kept engaging with the technology, kept holding the people, building it accountable. That kind of persistence, when it's grounded in genuine understanding rather than blind faith, is actually rare in this space. And it's worth respecting, regardless of where you stand on XRP personally. What happens in the next 24 hours will be what it will be. Markets will react how they react. But the larger story of XRP, the story of whether this technology finds its place in the global financial system, is not a 24-hour story. It's a multi-year story that is still being written. The next 24 hours might be a significant chapter, but it is still just a chapter. That's going to do it for today. If this video gave you something to think about, if it helped you look at this moment with a little more clarity and context, then it did its job. If you want to keep following along as this story develops, make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the updates as they come in. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them, I take them seriously, and the conversation down there is always worth having. And as always, stay informed, stay rational, do your own research, and take care of yourselves out there. This is Justin Wu. I'll see you in the next one.